Today, we're exploring the cutting edge of molecular medicine with a true pioneer in nitric oxide research. With over 25 years of groundbreaking discoveries, he's helped advance therapies for heart disease, Alzheimer's, and chronic wounds. He's the founder and CEO of a clinical stage biotech company, the author of several books, and a leader in bringing nitric oxide-based products to the public. A Ph.D. recipient and award-winning researcher, he's recognized worldwide for his contributions to science and medicine. This is the story of the secret of nitric oxide with Dr. Nathan Bryan. Dr. Bryan, so nice to have you on.
Good morning, Casper. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You know, I think of all these molecules that are so important and they get so much credit. You talk about oxygen. Nowadays, it's NAD is the fountain of youth, right? That's been for years now. But nitric oxide usually doesn't get that much credit, I feel like. What brought you to the realization that you want to kind of dedicate your life to this molecule?
It goes back right after the Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998. I was a student. I had a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from University of Texas. I was enrolled in a Ph.D. program at LSU School of Medicine in molecular and cellular physiology. And, fortunately, one of the guys, Lou Ignarro, who had just won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of nitric oxide, came to LSU and gave a lecture and, had a chance to have a conversation with him. And it was a remarkable topic of interest for me. He said, even going back, 27 years now, 28 years, that the loss of nitric oxide appeared to be the earliest event in the onset and progression of chronic disease. So, we knew a lot then, but there was still really more we didn't know about this molecule than what we knew. Like, how does the human body make it? What leads to a natural loss of its production? And then, most importantly, how do we fix and correct all that? So that was, really got me interested. And I trained under a pharmacologist that had been in the nitric oxide field for the previous 20 years. And so, the stage was set and really had really good training, really good mentorship. And, we made a lot of discoveries. And, today we've answered a lot of questions and, have safe and effective product technology on the market that's changing people's lives every day.
Yeah, and you produce so many of them. I mean, I've known Neo 40 for a long time. You have I know, and 101 right now that you're doing a lot with. And one of the things people don't realize with nitric oxide, I think it gets this kind of reputation as an enhancer of physical performance. A lot of people before they work out, right, vascularity and everything, take NO2 or NO and do that. But you really emphasize that nitric oxide production declines with age, and that's a driving factor behind chronic disease, and especially things like cardiovascular disease and neurological issues. Can you talk about that, about how you connected the decline to those elements of people becoming sick?
Well, really, that data started in the 90s, looking at what we call endothelial dysfunction. So in these age-related studies, they take agonists like bradykinin and acetylcholine and fuse it in the brachial artery, the coronary arteries, and then look at the resultant vasodilation. So that's the ability to activate and stimulate enzymatic nitric oxide production. And what those data clearly showed was that with each decade, we lose, on average, about 10 to 12% of our endothelial function, the ability of the endothelial cells to produce nitric oxide. And then that appeared to be related to the loss of performance, whether it's cognitive performance, athletic performance, or sexual performance. That loss of nitric oxide, the ability to dilate blood vessels, oxygenate tissue, seemed to precede these symptoms and loss of performance. So then the question was, okay, what's leading to a loss of the enzymatic production of nitric oxide? And that's really where I came in and, years later discovered that, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, right? We can prevent the loss of function of that enzyme and maintain normal endothelial function, even, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. And so now, we really can't do anything about our chronological age because each of us has a birth date, but we certainly can reverse or slow down our biological aging. And that's what we focused on now for the past 25 years is how do we prevent the loss of function of the enzyme that makes nitric oxide? Then how do we maintain a normal microbiome to sustain and maintain normal nitric oxide production and avoid the things that are disrupting? And when we do that, we can reverse biological aging and really slow down the aging process.
Well, why don't we start there with the things that are disrupting? Because, first and foremost, we want to kind of get to root causes that are disrupted before we start supplementing or trying to boost it if we're always going to have those kind of issues. So What are some of the biggest culprits of things we should look at that would be disrupting our NO pathways?
Well, before we answered that question, we had to first understand how the human body makes nitric oxide. So
Mm.
there's two primary pathways, and we'll discuss each of those of what's leading to a loss of production from those pathways. So the first is I talked about this enzyme nitric oxide synthase, and it's really oxidative stress. So an inflammatory diet, a high sugar diet, that leads to oxidation of tetrahydrobiopterin, which is the rate limiting step in nitric oxide production. So what does that mean? It means a high sugar diet. Anything that leads to an elevation in blood sugar disrupts the function of that enzyme. And we explain that because sugar or glucose is sticky, right? It's glucose, as the name implies, is glue. And so when we have too much glucose in our blood, it sticks to proteins, it sticks to enzyme. It's, hemoglobin A1C is quantifying the amount of sugar that's bound to hemoglobin. And when sugar or glucose sticks to these molecules or these proteins like hemoglobin, it glues it together to where it can't undergo these conformational changes. And for hemoglobin to do its job to deliver oxygen, pick up carbon dioxide, it's got to undergo a conformational change. And if there's too much glucose stuck to it, it can't. And that's why diabetics become hypoxic. They develop peripheral neuropathy, macular degeneration, non-healing wounds, because their circulation and oxygenation is impaired. So just as the glucose sticks to hemoglobin, it sticks to the enzyme nitric oxide synthase and renders it dysfunctional. So glucose is the enemy. Sugar's the poison. And so I tell people avoid anything that leads to an elevation in blood sugar. And you have to do this with continuous glucose monitors, because what may cause an increase in blood sugar on you may not for me, and vice versa. And that's why we have to personalize it. So avoid sugar, avoid supplements that contain sugar and seed oils. Many companies are out there putting nutrients and supplements in gummies and chews and basically poisoning the ingredient because it's sticking to the molecule and it renders it inactive. But yeah, then it's lack of physical exercise, seed oils, and then some drug therapy, things like proton pump inhibitors, cholesterol lowering medications. All of those inhibit nitric oxide production through that enzyme in the endothelium. So that's number one. Then number two, there's what we call an enterosalivary circuit, that foods we eat, primarily green leafy vegetables, are enriched in nitrate. We salivate that, it's concentrated in our salivary glands, and then there's bacteria that live on the crypts of our tongue that perform the 2-electron reduction of nitrate into nitrite. And humans do not have this enzyme, so we're dependent upon the oral bacteria. And then when we swallow our saliva, we get a burst of nitric oxide gas in the lumen of the stomach. So then what disrupts that pathway? Number one, it's a poor diet, the standard American diet or the SAD diet. Number two, anything that's antiseptic, fluoride in our drinking water, fluoride in our toothpaste, antiseptic mouthwash. And then number three, it's anything that suppresses stomach acid. So all your antacids, your proton pump inhibitors, your H2 antagonists, all of those disrupt nitric oxide production at these different stages. And what are the consequences? Heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. I mean, that's the clear clinical evidence now.
Yeah, and you're talking about something that's so prevalent, right? All those things you mentioned are prevalent. We feed kids sugary, breakfasts, right? We're mostly being pushed on to proton inhibitors and drugs that would do that too. And one of the things that was fascinating that you brought up here is the idea that our oral microbiome is kind of where it all starts. And when you put something in there and start to break it up, and I was just at a biological dentist that was checking all of that, that was looking and then showing you on a microscope, oh, you have this, you have a, spirochete here, and that's not good, but you got good ones here. And it's a rarity to see that. It's a rarity to even talk about it. We know gut microbiome, take your probiotics, eat your, Greek yogurt, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But we don't look at the oral microbiome. And I loved how you kind of focused on that in some ways. You even built out a toothpaste now. We'll get into that later. But I mean, for the listener, just how important, what steps are there to improving an oral microbiome?
Yeah, look, I mean, when I look at why we're doing things today, like why is there fluoride in 73% of the municipalities in the US? Why is there fluoride in most toothpaste? And why do 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash every day? And you have to go back 100 years because 100 years ago it was discovered this oral systemic link, right? People with poor oral hygiene had a higher incidence of heart attack and stroke. And you could culture pathogenic oral bacteria in the thrombus that cause sudden cardiac death in patients, right? So there was a translocation of pathogenic bacteria that causes systemic inflammation, plaque instability, plaque rupture, and heart attack, sudden cardiac death. So the remedy at the time was, and this is why bleeding gums are so important, because you get translocation of the oral bacteria into the systemic circulation. So the strategy and the treatment strategy at the time was, let's kill all the bacteria, right? Let's use fluoride, let's use chlorhexidine, let's use these stringent antiseptics. But remember, 100 years ago, we didn't know of a microbiome. Today, humans are 10 times more bacteria than we are human, right? There's 10 times more bacteria cells that live in and on our body than human. And now every major chronic disease is associated with dysbiosis. So now we know we have to support the microbiome. We can't destroy it. And so these practices that have survived for 100 years have to go away because we know better, right? And so fluoride, for me, it's all about risk benefit. What's the benefit? There is no benefit for fluoride. What's the risk? Well, it lowers IQ in kids by as much as 7 points. It shuts down your thyroid function. It's a neurotoxin. It causes dysbiosis. So you got to get rid of fluoride. And then antiseptic mouthwash, I don't watch a lot of TV, but I see these adverts and going, this kills 99.99% of the bacteria in your mouth. Yeah. And they seem to be proud of that. They seem to be proud that they're making patients sicker and causing dysbiosis and causing their blood pressure to go up and increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. So, we know better today, and we have to change the standard of care. I spoke before the American Dental Association, said, look, you got to stop doing this. There is a better way. The science proves that what you're doing is not making people better. And we have to start implementing strategies that obviously get rid of the pathogenic bacteria, the problem bacteria, but support the non-pathogenic commensal bacteria. And that's what I've been trying to do for the past 20 years is how do we restore the normal flora? How do we improve nitric oxide production and eliminate the things that are disrupting its natural production?
Fortunately, it seems that some of that is coming true in my state of Florida now. You person here, they took out the fluoride, right? They're looking at it. Saw the Surgeon General talking about the dangers of mercury fillings. Like, good, that should be applauded in some ways. But it's just the start, because you're right. These commercials, and I see them sometimes too. Now they're going alcohol free, right? But they still have all the germ bacteria, still saying 99% against germs. I mean, I think it's we're living in this antiseptic type world where we're supposed to be very fearful of germs, not even realizing we are germs, like you said, 10 times more germs than actual cells in our own body. And that's where the shift has to come. And I think really analyzing how do we differentiate good versus bad, right?
Yeah. No, look, I think that the evidence is really clear. And we and others have published on this, that the more diverse your oral microbiome, the better nitric oxide producing capacity you have, and the better management of blood pressure. And so in 2019, we published a paper showing that if you take normal intensive patients and you just give them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days, we completely destroy their microbiome. You decrease nitric oxide production. And in some people, we saw a 20 millimeter, 26 millimeter increase in their blood pressure. 7 days of just using mouthwash. And so there's clear evidence now that destroying the oral microbiome shuts down nitric oxide production, causes an increase in blood pressure. You lose the protective benefits of exercise. And it's bad news. It's rapidly accelerating the onset and progression of chronic disease. And you cannot ignore the science anymore, the basic science and the clinical translation of the science. And so we have to do better. We can do better. I think that's why these conversations are so important, because we have to support the microbiome and stop doing the things that are destroying it.
And speaking to a number of dentists, especially in the holistic and biological realm, a big part of the oral microbiome, as well as, of course, of the gut microbiome, is diet. It's what you're feeding it. Sure. Yes, you don't want to kill it. You shouldn't use those types of mouthwashes and everything. But, looking at it from a duality of oral microbiome and NO, right? What type of a diet is one that you would recommend for people to look at both of those?
Well, number one, it's elimination of sugar and simple carbs because when you consume a lot of sugar, it changes the pH of the saliva, completely changes the ecology of the microbiome. And that's where you get the spirochetes, you get the caries causing bacteria, you get the gingival plaque that causes periodontal disease. And so we have to maintain an optimal pH and change the ecology so the good bacteria can populate and create these biofilms and generate nitric oxide. So number one, that's the biggie. And then number two are nitrate-rich vegetables, primarily green leafy vegetables. This, we think, acts as a prebiotic because these are facultative anaerobes that can respire on nitrogen in the form of nitrate and reduce it from nitrate to nitrite because we got to remember nitrate is inert. And so if you don't have the right oral bacteria, if you eat green leafy vegetables or there are companies out there selling you a potassium nitrate capsule, it's inert in humans. If you don't have the right bacteria, you excrete it in the urine and the feces and you sweat it out. And so with 2 out of 3 Americans using mouthwash, fluoride in 73% of the municipalities, most of these products don't work and they can't work because they just don't have these people don't have the right oral bacteria to metabolize it into bioactive nitric oxide. And so that's the challenge. A lot of companies out there selling so-called nitric oxide products, but they don't work in the end patient or the consumer because these companies are either naive and don't understand the science, or they're intentionally defrauding their consumers. And so that's what we have to maintain the integrity of the field and understand the limitations in each patient and what products can or cannot work. And but no, it's a huge problem because as the awareness around nitric oxide improves, more companies are entering this space and creating products that cannot and do not produce nitric oxide.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on, there's a number of influence out there and people that are kind of pushing for more carnivore type diets, staying away from certain vegetables, pointing at oxalates and possibly contamination in these vegetables. I mean, what does the science in your mind, let's not even go with opinions here because there's a lot of those out there.
Yeah.
What does the science show on things like leafy greens, oxalates? What's the net benefit versus net harm?
I think it's individualized. I think the data, if you look at data with overt people with really obstructive coronary artery disease, and you put them on a plant-based diet, and this is the work of, Caldwell Esselstyn and a lot of these plant-based cardiologists, but the data on plaque regression with a plant-based diet is pretty damn convincing, right? So, but, I'm not a big fan of these extreme diets, plant-based, straight carnivore. I think it's a mix, and we have to get our nutrients from a diverse source, but there's certainly risk of oxalates and beets. People associate beets with nitric oxide, and beets are not nitric oxide, and beets are high in oxalates. It's a peasant food, and so we have to get away from this concept that beets are nitric oxide.
Let's jump into that really quick because I've heard that so much, right? Yeah. You put out, I'll post something about a NO supplement, your own, and I'll get a bunch of people coming back. Yeah, but high in oxalates. It's almost that thing. It's like, can you answer that? How would you answer that if someone's like, but high in oxalates?
Well, number one, beets are not nitric oxide. I think it's a deceptive marketing ploy by many companies out there. But look, again, you got to look where it started. And in the early 2012 Olympic Games in London, it was revealed that most of these Olympic athletes were drinking liters and liters of beetroot juice because several years prior to that, there were research labs, some colleagues of mine, that were publishing that a standardized nitrate beetroot juice could enhance exercise performance and improve athletic performance. So these early adopters, these well-trained athletes, take this and it improves their performance. And it was based on the published clinical data. So then a lot of companies started selling beet juice, beet powders. And so I started testing a lot of these. In fact, all of them. And most of them provide no inorganic nitrate or nitrite. It's just what we call a dead beet product. The only thing it does is it causes kidney stones, it causes your urine and your feces to become pink, and it causes a lot of anxiety because people think they have urinary bleeds or colon bleeds. But and still, that's today. I see these companies advertise on TV about beets. I mean, you can't turn on the TV without seeing this. And I've tested these products, and they provide zero nitric oxide benefit. It's the cheapest bead powder that they're putting in these different delivery forms and calling it nitric oxide. And it's a very dangerous proposition because I wake up every morning, just this morning, and I get emails saying, "Hey, Nathan, we saw you on a podcast and you talked about nitric oxide and how important nitric oxide is, but I've been taking this bead product now for a year or so, and my blood pressure hasn't improved. My energy hasn't improved. I've seen no difference. So, nitric oxide doesn't work for me." And I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a very dangerous interpretation. Nitric oxide always works. But you have to understand, beads aren't nitric oxide, and the beads that you're taking provide no nitric oxide benefit. So it's no wonder. So nitric oxide didn't fail you. That company and that product failed you. And so if this continues and we have regulators and policymakers and people in the FDA who are reviewing nitric oxide-based drug therapies, which we're developing, and they get this interpretation that nitric oxide is not important, then it could kill the entire industry. And I'm convinced nitric oxide is the future of medicine. There's not a single indication where nitric oxide wouldn't be beneficial at the right dose in the right patient. So that's a very dangerous, and I hold these companies accountable, and many of these companies have sued me because I demonstrate and reveal that their products don't work. But you know what? I'll take it on every day because we have to maintain the integrity of the field.
Absolutely. And I do have to say, working in this field and being around it for my whole life with my father being involved and, seeing so many of the doctors that are pioneers in this field, such as yourself, it really is shooting yourself in the foot when you have people come in and start to lower quality, make bigger claims, and hurt everyone involved, right? And I've seen that happen with just cheap IV pop-ups, right, that come along or anything, and you start to bring down that quality, you don't see the results, and then everyone is hurt because you're dragging down the people that are doing it properly.
Yeah. No, and that's my commitment. I was spent 20 years in academia and then turned entrepreneur because I've seen it, I've experienced it, where you have so-called business people come in and they put profits over science. Yep. And they cave in to, the profits of the business rather than letting the science lead the way. So, I've made a commitment in all of my companies. I will never abdicate my position as founder, chairman, and CEO to some guy because science will always lead where our products go. And we'll never bring a product to market that doesn't activate, stimulate, or produce nitric oxide and lead to the body's ability to produce nitric oxide. Because I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it because nitric oxide is the future. It's going to change the world, and we're going to be the ones to do it. And other companies have lost their way. Start it, but then, get off path and realize that there's more profits in creating inferior products and selling it to a larger database rather than let science lead the way and create products that actually work.
Medicine and wellness have become big business, right? And that attracts a lot of VCs, and VCs want quick profits and they want lower costs.
Exactly right.
They don't really care too much about results. They can market it well if the pioneers already prove the results, right?
That's right. And look, I've experienced it. I've seen it. And that's why,
I'm sure.
I've had private equity and venture capitalists come in and want to participate in what we're doing. And, it's always a hard no. I don't need their money. I don't want their money, and I want no association with them because, like I said, what I'm doing, I'm not building this to sell it. I'm not building it for the money. I'm building it to leave a legacy and change people's lives.
So talk about that process that differentiates the normal, let's say, beetroot kind of, supplement from what you're producing and what you found to be the real way to boost NO.
Well, again, in order to develop product technology, you have to understand how the human body makes nitric oxide. Mm-hmm. And without an experience and expertise in research and development and understanding cellular biology, biochemistry, and enzymology, then how can you even think about developing a product? And that's the problem with all these companies out there. They have no science. They have no scientists. They've got these talking heads who they pay. And so what we've tried to do is, number one, we understand the science. What leads to a natural loss of nitric oxide production? So our philosophy has always been, if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we got to do it for you, right? It's like if your body can't make testosterone, what do? We give you testosterone. Same in women. If you're postmenopausal women, you don't make estrogen, you don't give you DHEA or pregnenolone or these precursors and hope your body can make it. No, we give you the molecule. And that's what we do through our technology. We produce nitric oxide gas. We do it through an orally disintegrating tablet. We do it through a fermented beet powder where we actually remove the oxalates. So when you take our products, we produce nitric oxide gas. And we can demonstrate this through a gas phase ozone-based chemiluminescent analyzer. And we demonstrate our products produce NO gas. But more importantly, I think, is that we understand the enzymology. How do we restore the function of the enzyme? And then how do we restore the oral microbiome? And we do this through an orally disintegrating tablet that releases nitric oxide gas, changes the microbiome, restores the function of the enzyme. And we have clinical data to demonstrate this. Within 20 minutes of taking the lozenge, we see a 20% improvement in the enzyme's ability to produce nitric oxide, 20% improvement in endothelial function. We're changing the microbiome. We're dilating blood vessels. We're improving mitochondrial biogenesis. We're improving the number of circulating stem cells. And we're activating the telomerase enzyme, preventing the telomeres from getting shorter, improving longevity, health. And so those are the metrics that we live by, and those are the objective measurements that we put forth in clinical trials to demonstrate. And no other company out there does that, because you would never put a beet product that they're selling through a clinical trial, right? What these companies do is they take, okay, let's take this ingredient. This ingredient has been shown, given this ingredient alone, can stimulate nitric oxide production in animals or in healthy individuals. And then they put that ingredient in a matrix and they say, oh, this has been clinically proven. No, that product hasn't been clinically proven. And that's the deception that these companies do and perform to deceive their customers, thinking that this product is actually going to help them. Because you can give activators or stimulators till the cows come home, but if that enzyme isn't coupled and functional, you're never going to lead to any nitric oxide being produced. And so this is the wild, wild west in supplements, because all these companies, other companies can say the exact same thing that I say, but yet they don't have the science to prove it, to demonstrate it. So that's my goal every day when I wake up, is how do I differentiate what I do from all these other yahoos out there who are, selling their customers a bill of goods with products that can't work. And that's why these conversations are so important, because it really allows us to differentiate and look for good science, look for somebody who's published in the nitric oxide field and, understands the science so that they can develop rational product technology.
An interesting thing about the science is that it's not showing any direct correlation, I would say one-to-one of benefits, meaning that only nitric oxide is good for cardiovascular health, or only is it, this is a valuable molecule that could work how it's needed within the body in a sense and help in a number of ways. And one of the things I found very interesting to move away from cardiovascular wellness, even longevity, is neurological. And you wrote the future of Alzheimer's drug therapy is nitric oxide. Can you go into why you wrote that and what you're seeing in the research that made you write that?
Well, it goes back to 2011, and we published a very seminal paper showing that nitric oxide is required for insulin signaling and glucose uptake. So what we're finding in our interpretation from that study was that insulin resistance is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. So now how do we bring that into Alzheimer's? And what I've been looking at for the past 20 years is what's the root cause of Alzheimer's? And it's a vascular disease. We've known that for the past 20 years, because if you look at SPECT scans or functional MRIs, there's always reduced blood flow to the brain. And this is the work of Daniel Amen and others. And so if you can't get oxygen and nutrients to parts of the brain, then those cells can't do their job. You get misfolding of proteins, and that shows up as tau tangles and amyloid plaque. So that's the vascular component of Alzheimer's. And then you've probably heard Alzheimer's be termed diabetes type 3 because it's insulin resistance in the brain. The cells, the neurons, don't get glucose because they become insulin resistant. And then based on our 2011 paper, now that nitric oxide can potentiate insulin signaling, overcome insulin resistance, get glucose into the cell. Now, what does nitric oxide do? It dilates the blood vessels, perfuse the brain, overcomes insulin resistance, gets glucose into the cells do their job, you don't get misfolding of proteins, and you don't get any amyloid plaque or tau tangles. So nitric oxide addresses the root cause etiology of what we call mild cognitive impairment, vascular dementia, and Alzheimer's. And so, that's why we're developing a drug therapy for this, because I'm absolutely convinced that it'll eradicate, prevent, treat, cure, and reverse Alzheimer's. Because again, mechanistically, we understand what causes Alzheimer's. And if you look at the billions of dollars that's been spent on monoclonal antibody drug therapy against the tau tangles and the amyloid plaque, billions of dollars wasted. There's been no effective drug for that. And the reason for that is that the tau tangles and the amyloid are consequences of the disease. So developing drug therapy against a consequence of disease will not work, it cannot work, and it doesn't work. And so, that's been a major, waste of time, money, and energy by these companies when let's focus on mechanism. Let's address the root cause, which is lack of nitric oxide, focal ischemia, insulin resistance in the brain. We give nitric oxide back, we restore blood flow, we restore insulin resistance, and the brain functions. It's very simple.
Have you witnessed any clinical cases of the use of your products in Alzheimer's patients?
Absolutely. We've done in a subset of patients, I think 10 or 12 patients a couple of years ago, we took what's called mild cognitive impairment. Brain fog, lack of memory recall, and we give them a cognitive exam, and we take pictures of the brain to functional MRI, and we show that there's reduced blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. They do very poorly on cognitive exams or memory recall. And then we treat them with our nitric oxide releasing lozenge for 30 days, we bring them back, blood flow is improved in the brain, they improve on their cognition, and the improvement in cognition correlates very nicely with an increase in blood flow. So, and that's now we're developing that into an FDA clinical trial with the help of Dr. David Perlmutter that will enter this and get this through a clinical trial and hopefully have an FDA-approved drug for Alzheimer's in the coming years. But that takes time and money, and we're in the process of allocating the resources to do that, design the drug trial. But for me, it's about enrolling the right patient, right? Because the success or failure of any drug therapy is number one, the clinical trial design and the dosing regimen. So I want to catch patients far enough along, vascular dementia, early Alzheimer's, where we can show that we can slow the progression, but also get them far enough along to where we can show that we can regress the disease. They actually get better. And so selecting that patient cohort is going to be very important. And the success or failure, I think, of our drug trial is going to be on the patient inclusion in that. But, the basic science data is very clear. The clinical translation of it is very clear. And now my job is to get this in the hands of many clinics, Alzheimer's clinics, and start treating patients in a double-blind, placebo-controlled study and get this drug approved and on the market.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, about the synergies of this. Of course, when you're running these clinicals, you want to isolate, nitric oxide. How is that improving it? But I'm also wondering if you have heard of other doctors. Even when I had Dr. Besner on from Therasage, he was saying, take the NO, right, the supplement before you jump in the infrared sauna or before you do any ozone or anything like that, improve the absorption of it, which was very interesting. And then you think about hyperbaric chambers or just pure ozone therapy, all types of different ones. And that idea of synergistically using an NO supplement to boost while doing that to enhance the actual results. Have you spoken to doctors or seen that yourself where there are synergies with other therapies?
No, for sure. I mean, nitric oxide is foundational. It's not an end-all be-all cure-all. It's not a panacea. There are other things we have to address. And then, unfortunately, in drug trials, we have to isolate a single drug on top of whatever else they're taking, right? So we can't withhold treatment. We've got to add this on top of whatever they're taking. But look, in the field of biohacking, we're seeing this potentiation of the therapeutic effects of infrared sauna, of hyperbaric oxygen, of all these other what we call biostacking, because nitric oxide is going to dilate the blood vessels, improve tissue oxygenation. The mechanism of action of red light therapy is releasing nitric oxide from metals and activating mitochondrial energy production. And so if you got a patient that's nitric oxide deficient, they have less photolabile stores of nitric oxide to be released by infrared light. And so if you take the lozenge before infrared, which is what I do every morning, take my lozenge or my beads and I get in my Therasage 170 degrees for 30 minutes and detoxing. I'm fully oxygenating my blood, and it's that time I do my prayers and meditation and express gratitude, and that's how I start my day every day, and it's a great way to start the day.
It really is. I have to say that that's one of my favorite things is to jump in there, take a little NO before and just kind of just, start it off on a good foot, right? Good
Yeah.
basis. But, for others listening to this that may say, okay, I'm thinking about trying something, a supplement of yours or anything, any counterindication, adverse reactions that you should know about when you're dealing with nitric oxide?
Yeah, I mean, nitric dose dictates poison. So too much causes what's called methemoglobinemia, and it can cause an unsafe drop in blood pressure. But the doses that we're delivering in our consumer products or over-the-counter products, we've never seen an adverse event. We've never seen any methemoglobin formation. We've never seen an unsafe drop in blood pressure because we know kind of what the toxicity load of nitric oxide is, and we would never deliver that. For supplements, all you have to do is demonstrate safety. We can't demonstrate efficacy. But in our drug trials, we'll titrate up the dose and look at not only the safety but the efficacy in these different indications. But so some of the common feedback is people develop like a mouth sensitivity and their tongue gets sore, like a burning sensation. And it's not that common, but it's not uncommon. And what we're finding is that it's diagnostic for a really low pH of the saliva. So if your saliva is really acidic, that lozenge can cause some irritation. So the solution to that is a couple of things. Number one, you can take baking soda, swish it, raise the pH of your saliva, and then you mitigate the sensitivity of the lozenge. But more importantly, you got to figure out, why is your saliva pH so low? Are you mouth breathing it at night? Are you using fluoride in your toothpaste? Are you using antiseptic mouthwash? And so we try to get people to focus on restoring their oral flora and going to a good biological dentist who understands this, and not some regular dentist who's going to fluorinate you and tell you to take chlorhexidine and mouthwash and all that and make things worse. So focusing on the oral microbiome is kind of front and center for us. And the people who do develop the sensitivity, it's diagnostic for oral dysbiosis. And so, I encourage people to switch to our CardioSmile toothpaste, stop using mouthwash, change the ecology in the mouth so that the good bacteria can repopulate. We can normalize the salivary pH, and then the sensitivity goes away.
Let's talk about that toothpaste because I found that very interesting, right? Because again, you think about nitric oxide, you're going into the supplements, you're talking performance and everything. And here you have both toothpaste, and we'll get into next the skincare system.
Yeah.
But starting with the toothpaste, how do you derive at that formula, and what is the main benefit of your toothpaste?
I've been aware of the dangers of fluoride for probably 25, 30 years. And so during that time, I've used a non-fluorinated toothpaste. But there were still things in it that I didn't like, and it was still causing, some but even somebody who's very front and center and aware of my oral hygiene. And so as we progressed in the science and started publishing these papers, identifying these certain bacteria and the ones that were nitric oxide producing, then we had to figure out, okay, what do these bugs need? What do they need to repopulate? What do they not need to create these biofilms in this normal ecology for optimal nitric oxide production? So number one, no fluoride. Number two, we understand how to repopulate these bugs. We put prebiotics in there. And we can't forget, this is a toothpaste. And the goal of a toothpaste is to maintain the, tooth remineralization, good healthy teeth, get the plaque off, and maintain a normal healthy microbiome. So it's hydroxyapatite based, remineralizes the teeth, fluoride free. We've got prebiotics in there. We put things in there that we're finding that affects these biofilms and creates the proper ecology. But at the same time, you want something that's going to leave your breath feeling fresh and minty. So we put certain oils in there, essential oils that leave the mouth really silky feeling and optimize the pH and normalize the salivary pH. So that was the metric. And for years there was no product out there that I liked. So I go, well, I'll create my own because I understand the science, I understand what these bacteria need, and so we can create a toothpaste. And now, interestingly, we've only had this on the market for a couple of months, but we're finding people that have what's called resistant hypertension, right? Their blood pressure, they have high blood pressure, and it's resistant to standard therapy. And so my whole thought process was, we've demonstrated years ago that if you take normal intensive patients, you kill their oral bacteria, their blood pressure goes up. Now, can we do the opposite? Can you take people with oral dysbiosis, their blood pressure is high, restore their oral flora, and normalize their blood pressure? And we're finding, again, this is anecdotal. We haven't done any clinical trials on this, but people have had noticed that their blood pressure becomes more normal when they
Hmm.
switch to the toothpaste. So when we target the microbiome, improve nitric oxide production, their blood pressure becomes more normal. And with high blood pressure being the number one driver of cardiovascular disease, the number one killer, I mean, you think about the public health benefits of this and the implications globally. I mean, this is life changing. And now we're working on a mouth rinse that again targets, doesn't kill the oral microbiome, improves the diversity of it. That we'll have on the market probably in first quarter of 2026.
Yeah, you really can't understate the importance of the oral microbiome dental health together, right?
Yeah,
So many issues that you see systemic start in the mouth. And you're just learning. I just rewatched the documentary Root Cause recently. My buddy Fraser, who put that together and was about his story. And it's just like one root canal, one
yeah,
wisdom tooth extraction, oral microbiome, like all these things, fluoride, mercury, are so vital. And that's really, really interesting that you've made that and you've seen such a difference already anecdotally that you just
yeah.
start to change that opening to the rest of your body, and then everything in the body will change. And we overlook that so much.
Yeah, and then when people start to understand the importance and pay attention to it, and they eliminate sugar and
Yes.
in gums and all these things that are destroying the microbiome and lowering the pH, and then they become aware of that and then stop doing it, they get better, more profound results. And so, this for us, when people like to see benefits and change and then become more motivated to continue to change, because a lot of times people don't realize how unhealthy and how bad they felt until they start
Right.
feeling better, right? And then
That's
they're
right.
thinking, wow, I didn't realize how bad I felt until I started feeling better. And now they're motivated to continue to make changes. It's very simple. It's very small steps, but the progression of this is life changing.
Yeah. And we talk about oral microbiome, but your skin also has a microbiome, right? And that's important as well. And you've created a unique application of NO for anti-aging and skin health. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the that first came into my mind, and it was never my kind of desire or motivation to become into skincare and beauty, but this idea came back in 2014. My dad, who's a paraplegic from a car accident in 1984, so for 40 something years he's been rolling around in a wheelchair and developed decubitus pressure ulcers. And in 2014 he had a stage 4 right ischial ulcer that developed osteonecrosis and became septic, and he almost died from it. So once we got him out of the hospital, took him to wound care, and all the wound care clinics said, well, you can never heal this wound in a 60-year-old diabetic paraplegic patient. And I just refused to accept that. So I started creating a nitric oxide generating dressing that I would put into the wound. It killed the infection because nitric oxide is antimicrobial to the pathogens, and it gets blood flow to the wound. In a 4-year-old non-healing wound, we start to see some healing within a matter of a couple of weeks. And then within a matter of 6 or 8 months, we completely healed a 4-year-old non-healing wound by producing nitric oxide. We mobilize stem cells. We use red light therapy. We use ozone. We use a lot of things. But really what moved the needle firstly was the nitric oxide. So then all these wound care docs were like, Nathan, we can't do what you've done. How do we get access to this? And that's why we're developing this as a drug therapy. But it takes 10 years and about $800 million to bring a drug to market. But to bring a skincare product to market, it's we did all the safety studies, the sensitivity studies, and we brought a dual chamber nitric oxide serum to market. So these are two
Mm.
separate chambers that when you mix these together, when they come together, they produce nitric oxide gas. And as you mentioned, the skin is an organ, just like the brain, the heart, or the sex organs. And when it doesn't have adequate circulation, it fails. And then you lose hydration, you lose collagen, fine lines and wrinkles show up, you get acne, dermatitis, age spots. So the idea for this was, can we improve nitric oxide production topically, improve perfusion, mobilize stem cells, improve cellular turnover, and improve collagen deposition? And we've got 6 published peer-reviewed clinical trials on the serum, and fine lines and wrinkles, tone, texture, and clarity of the skin, acne, eczema, rosacea, wound remediation, wound healing, scar remediation. I mean, it's been an amazing product. In fact, it's a completely new category in skincare, and it's transforming the health and beauty space. But I'm excited about that, but I'm more excited about the applications for wound care, because 65,000 Americans die every year in nursing homes from wounds, non-healing wounds that get infected. They get septic and they die. And we haven't seen a wound that we haven't been able to heal with our topical nitric oxide. So I'm really excited about getting that into clinical trials, because it's gonna change the landscape of wound care.
Oh yeah, and we need that. The whole kind of anti-aging field has been sort of stuck in its kind of what's the new chemical we could use that's going to do this, when really we're just raising toxicity in the body. Most women can understand that, because they use so many cosmetics now that have so many bad ingredients in them. It's time we start to switch and look at things that can naturally promote health from the body, from the inside out. And another area, and you mentioned this just a second ago, with the sexual reproductive organs. And you're seeing this blow up across the board in these, Hims and Row.com sexual wellness. And again, it's take more of these drugs, and you'll perform in bed. And it's an issue. Of course, you can say that this is something that is a more cosmetic almost issue that impacts your life in many ways. But you look at it from a different perspective, and you could say, well, that's a vasodilation kind of problem in a sense. How does NO help with that?
Well, nitric oxide is responsible for vessel dilation, engorgement, and sexual function. And we know, the PD5 inhibitors, the Viagras, the Cialis, the Levitras of the world, work because they work downstream of nitric oxide. So the way this works, the way smooth muscle relaxation occurs, is nitric oxide is produced, it diffuses into the smooth muscle, activates an enzyme called soluble guanylate cyclase. That enzyme converts GTP into cyclic GMP. And cyclic GMP is the second messenger that mobilizes calcium, leads to smooth muscle relaxation and vasodilation. So that's the cellular mechanism of vasodilation. And these drugs called phosphodiesterase inhibitors prevent the breakdown of the second messenger cyclic GMP, right? And so that's why it potentiates vasodilation. That's why you're warned against 4-hour erections, because nitric oxide turns this switch on, and then the PD5 inhibitors prevent it from turning off. And so you can have an unsafe drop in blood pressure. You can have 4-hour erections, lead to necrosis of your organ, which is not a good thing, by the way. But, we now know that these drugs have been on the market since 1998, and only 50% of the men that are prescribed these drugs respond with better erections. And now, why are these drugs not working in 50% of the patients? It's because if their body's not making any nitric oxide, there's no cyclic GMP that's accumulating. So these drugs, there's nothing to work on. So what we found is that erectile dysfunction in men and women is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. It's not a disease of an overactive phosphodiesterase enzyme. It's a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. But here's the bigger picture. If you have endothelial dysfunction in the sex organs and you can't dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs, you have that same dysfunction in the coronary arteries, in the cerebral arteries. You've lost the regulation of blood flow to every organ in the body. It's a systemic disease. It's the canary in the coal mine. So now what we're finding is if we can restore the natural production of nitric oxide, or give our nitric oxide products that generate nitric oxide, we get vasodilation. We can improve sexual function by giving nitric oxide alone. But interestingly, we can take 50% of those patients who don't respond to the PD5 inhibitors, combine it with our nitric oxide technology, and now those patients respond. And it's life-changing, because it's all about circulation. It's all about blood flow. It's all about being able to regulate blood flow to certain organs, tissues, and cells upon demand. And that's what nitric oxide does.
If you were to give your recommendations outside of boosting nitric oxide, right? Because we get that that's vitally important, but what would be like your top 3 recommendations to living a healthy life? I always like to hear this, especially when people really analyze one area, because then you start to say, all right, let's get out of that area. What are your top 3 recommendations to live a healthy, happy life?
Number 1 would be intermittent fasting. Every day I do an 18-hour fast, and that's really changed kind of my hunger pangs, my body composition, the visceral fat just melts away. So every day I do an 18-hour fast. And once a week, I'll do a 24-hour fast. And usually once a quarter, I'll do a 48 or 72-hour fast. But that completely resets your metabolism. And that's simple to do. I say it's simple. Sometimes it's not easy for a lot of people, but you have to have the discipline to do that. But once you do it, your body just, my body craves it sometimes if I go and I just, okay, I need to do a fast. Mm-hmm. The other is grounding, walking barefoot on the earth, because the earth is a big magnet, an unlimited source of electrons. And, biochemistry, as a biochemist, we're always counting electrons. When we run out of electrons, we die. So we need to improve the voltage and the circuitry and the electron flow in the body. And the best way to do that is to walk barefoot. And then number 3, what's 3? Drinking good, clean water. I think, the water we drink in municipal water supply is toxic. It's got drug metabolites. It's got fluoride, chlorine, chloramine. And so staying hydrated with good, clean, remineralized water. And I think that addresses really the basics of physiology. We need to hydrate. We need electrons. We need energy. And we need to change our metabolism. And intermittent fasting does that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that from someone with a scientific background, because most of the times you're going to hear very scientific answers in that, yet grounding, fasting, and clean water. It's like nothing could be simpler. And you're not promoting anything there. You're actually not promoting food and getting outside. It's nothing expensive. I always say this to people because they have this misconception that to be healthy, you have to be rich. You have to, buy your health. When the reality is, if you take the free steps, you'll always have your health. Connect with nature, don't eat as much, drink clean water, remove toxins. Get outside. Right? Yeah.
For me, that when I get out of the sauna, I'll typically, some days I'll do a cold plunge, but then I go out and sit in my yard naked and watch the sun come up for 20 minutes.
That's amazing.
Right? I live in the country. I don't have any neighbors.
Yeah.
They don't call the cops on me. But that sunlight, that first sunlight in the morning, and getting the electrons from the earth is, it's magical. It's the best. Obviously I come to Florida a lot, and one of my favorite things to do is stay on the beach and get up and be on the beach watching the sun come up.
It's amazing. The negative ions you get, the fresh air, the sunlight that regulates circadian rhythms, and all that is free.
I feel it. It's medicine.
Yeah. And you got a 700-acre cattle ranch out there. So you got a lot of land you could roam on naked if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's right. We raise our own beef. We grow our own vegetables. And so I know the food that I'm giving my kids and family is nutrient dense and free of any herbicides or pesticides and toxins. So it's, I've been extremely blessed and fortunate to be able to live this type of lifestyle. But, I've worked hard to do this.
Yeah, no, it's the proper lifestyle, I think, to go. You could live in a big city. I lived in New York City for a number of years, and it's wonderful for a portion of time, I say.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, it's like we got to reconnect with where we came from, which is nature, which is getting out there more. You have these amazing, advancements in technology and supplements that could absolutely serve as catalysts. But if you don't have the foundations behind it, you're kind of pushing a big boulder uphill that you're going to need to take a lot more energy to do so. And, looking at everything you've done and, 25 years in the field, what are you most excited about next?
I'm excited about our drug therapy. As a basic scientist, I never got into this field of research to develop dietary supplements or skincare. My objective from day one was and really this was the mission of the institute where I was first hired at the Institute of Molecular Medicine, was to understand the mechanism of disease to the extent that we can develop rational therapies. And that's been my goal. So now my goal is to develop safe and effective nitric oxide product technology into every major market segment around the world. But what gets me excited, and there's some adoption of nitric oxide, right? But there's still these companies out there that are lowering the kind of the hurdle and the expectations for nitric oxide. But when we get our drugs approved and on the market, and now physicians can feel good about writing a prescription for a nitric oxide-based drug therapy for ischemic heart disease or Alzheimer's or a diabetic ulcer, that's going to save people's lives. It's going to make them live longer, live healthier, and for the first time, get off other prescription medication. Because if we can restore blood flow and circulation and oxygenation and mobilize stem cells, everything's going to work better. And that's what gets me up every day. And the dozens of emails and texts I get from people that we've changed their life, we've saved their lives in many cases. And if that doesn't light your fire, as we say in Texas, then your wood's wet. That's what keeps me going and gets me up every day with a smile on my face, because I know what we're doing is going to change the world. But people still come after me, they attack me. But there's an old saying from 400 years ago by Schopenhauer that truths always go through three stages. Number one, they're violently opposed. Or no, they're ridiculed, they're violently opposed, and they're accepted as being self-evident. So I've been ridiculed. I've had violent opposition to me, lawsuits, people coming after me. But what we're doing is self-evident. So these are truths. I've endured the first two phases of this, but it is self-evident, and we're entering that third phase of these truths.
Well, that third stage is the one where it all comes to fruition, and that's what makes it all worthwhile. And thank you for that mission you have, your purpose and everything, and the work you're doing. Where can people learn more about you and connect with you?
I've just published my latest book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. This tells the story of nitric oxide, really the conversation we had, what led to a Nobel Prize. So if you're interested in health, I say nitric oxide is only for two people: the healthy who don't want to get sick, or the sick who want to get healthy. And so that's a must read. If you're one of those two people, this is a must read. But yeah, nathansbook.com, or anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I encourage people to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because we provide a lot of science. There's a lot of misinformation out there. What we try to do is impart knowledge, not information, but knowledge based on real science, so consumers can make educated decisions and really make these really small changes to their diet and lifestyle, and see remarkable progress. But it's all about education. YouTube is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, Nitric Oxide. Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, I'm Dr. Nitric. And for those interested in our product technology, it's n101.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for sharing your story and sharing your mission. Yeah, I really hope people resonate with this and see the profound importance of something like nitric oxide. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me and helping us communicate our message.
Absolutely. As you heard, be sure to visit Dr. Bryan's website. That's n101.com, as well as pick up his book at nathansbook.com. We'll include all the social channels on our show notes. But until next time, keep writing your own healing story.